Well, folks, reviews are rolling in for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and there's two things I want to find out from the reviews. Obviously, the overall score or cumulative score is kind of nice to at least gauge if people are finding this to be a good game. It's not going to obviously be up in the 90s like a Breath of the Wild. No one should expect that to be the case. It is a Musou game, but to see if it can at least hold its own, this generation right now on PlayStation 5, like Godfall came out, and that was supposed to be this big deal game, which really it just became a visual spectacle, and the game itself isn't that good. So I was kind of worried that maybe Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity might be the same thing, where you end up getting a solid game, but, it's more of a spectacle than it is being a good game. Well, that's not the case, and maybe I shouldn't have been worried about that because of the fact that this is Hyrule Warriors, but I'm sitting here looking at the Metacritic score. It's at a 78 right now. I actually expect it to come down a little bit because there's some critical reviews that are lower, like GameSpot, as an example. They gave it a 6. That's not on this list yet, but you got digitally downloaded with 100, Vooks at 90, Shack News at 90, GameSpew at 90, Aerial Guns at 890, Multiplayer.it at 85, COG Connected with an 85, Destructoid with an 85, God is Geek with an 85, MGG Spain with an 82, Twin Finite with an 80, Nintendo Life with an 80. Actually read Nintendo Life's review. Screen Rant with an 80, EGM with an 80, Eurogamer Italy with an 80, IGN Italia with an 80, WCCF Tech with a 78, XGN with a 75, Critical Hit with a 70, Stevier with a 65, and Metro Game Central with a 60. There'll be other ones rolling in here. Obviously, you're seeing some key ones. GameSpot, the main IGN website's not on there yet. There's going to be a whole bunch of stuff being added to this. So this score is going to be fluctuating all day long, but this kind of gives you a nice, it's probably going to be in the 70s somewhere. Somewhere in the 70s, hopefully in the 75 plus range. I don't think we're going to see this one up in the 80s. Now, there's a few reasons for that. One, almost all the reviews mention frame rate issues. I haven't seen a single review that doesn't bring up the fact that there are not significant frame rate issues. For those hoping that it was just a demo thing, it's not. It's a thing that's prevalent throughout the entire game, especially in stages, later stages, maybe even more so than the beginning ones, just because there's a lot more visual effects going on with the enemies and your attacks, Urbosa's lightning attack, all that jazz. So there is performance issues. To be fair to Musou games, they always have performance issues. This isn't surprising. So if the demo didn't bother you, this is what I'll say. If the demo's frame rate issues didn't bother you, then you probably won't be bothered for the rest of the game. Personally, I wasn't bothered that much by the frame rate issues. I noticed them. I wish they weren't there, but it didn't really ruin my experience because I expected it because the original Hyrule Warriors on Wii U had them as well. So, par for the course. However, another thing, and I want to warn you for this part here, spoilers. And we're talking about story here for a moment. Spoiler. And I will tell you end spoilers when it's over if you want to skip ahead. The thing I wanted to find out in the reviews was a little bit about the story. Now, I don't want to know the whole thing, but I did a report late last night about how Nintendo might have lied to us about this being a prequel. And I can't really fully dive into whether they lied or not. Did Nintendo actually call it a prequel? This is stuff that we'll talk about once the game's in my hands. I beat it, and in my review, because my review is coming later, my review will be a spoiler-filled review. So, warning there, if you want spoiler-free reviews, probably don't watch mine, because I like to dive into the nitty-gritty. But that's because I feel like reviews are giving my opinion on the game, and how can I give my opinion on the game if I'm holding back? I don't think you should hold back. I understand for reviews like this that come out before the game comes out, absolutely. If I had a review copy of a game with a review deadline before the game came out, I would probably hold back on some spoilers as well, but that's not the case for me. So yeah, I will be probably reviewing this game. So getting into the story a little bit, I reported yesterday that the story doesn't really seem to do much in terms of telling the backstory. Like Link survives, the champions survive. Which by the way, Link survives anyways. For people that were complaining that, Link didn't die. Link never died anyways. He wasn't doing well, but he didn't die. He was put in the pool of resurrection, not because he needed to be resurrected, but because he needed time to heal. And it just happened to take, 100 years for him to fully heal. So, yeah, he wasn't actually dead. I know there's a confusion by calling it the Pool of Resurrection when he wasn't actually dead. Moving on. It's interesting because, yeah, there does appear to be time travel. Yeah, there is the people from the future like Riju and Teba and such coming back to the past to help. And there seems to be this big victory that happens right before, because I've seen the quote-unquote so-called ending cutscene. There's apparently 3 endings, so that's something to keep in mind. But I saw like the quote-unquote ending cutscene that happens before the credits, and it's kind of like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. Why did the champions survive? Why is Link still around? What's going on? Well, there's content after the credits. So one thing I got from a few of the reviews, because there's not very many reviews talking about it, but there's about, I think 3 reviews I've checked out so far that actually talk about the story, and they don't go into too many details, but it looks like even though all these things from the cutscenes are quote-unquote true, in terms of the time travel, in terms of that ending scene where everyone mishmashes together for a big final battle, all this stuff is real and legit, and definitely not really feeling like that's what we should know of as the backdrop of Breath of the Wild. Apparently, without context of playing the game, you don't understand. So within context of the game, it actually goes over a ton of things that connect directly to Breath of the Wild's backstory. So it actually ends up making sense. Somehow ends up making sense. It's weird to me. There's time travel here. Is that time travel going to exist in Breath of the Wild 2 now? Are the champions going to come forward in time? What's going to happen? I have no idea. But what I do know is it looks like the full breadth of the backstory of Breath of the Wild is there. It just fails to conclude in a way that gives us anything we don't already know. So I guess there must be a point where, yes, it becomes obvious the champions are dying. Yes, Zelda does her thing, but the game kind of pulls back a bit so you can keep playing it over and over again as these characters. So in the end, it actually ends up being what it set out to be, which is a prequel to Breath of the Wild with the Zelda team behind the story. So gotta remember one thing about this story: it was written 100% by the Breath of the Wild story team. So for people being like, oh well, it's maybe it's just a spin-off, it's not a big, it is a spin-off, but it's still technically a quote-unquote prequel. It is what happened 100 years ago. There's just a lot that happened that apparently we didn't know about, that Breath of the Wild never told us about. So I think that is what's confusing people, and even confused me. Like when I watched the final cutscene, which I haven't watched any other cutscene, but I watched that final one just because I wanted to see, okay, were the people talking about this being honest? They were being honest, but there's context missing. And as always, when you have an incomplete set of information, context matters. So without getting more spoilerific than I already was, that's kind of where it stands right now based on these reviews, based on what I'm seeing. The story, the backdrop of Breath of the Wild is actually there. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of context for that story beyond the things we already know happen. But we find out some things that also happened that aren't really that relevant by the time Breath of the Wild comes around. Like a lot of the story is around events and things that occur that right now don't really hold any importance at all. However, it's possible that's because some of these events will come up again in the sequel to Breath of the Wild. We have to remember, there is a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild coming, and it is entirely possible that some of the events in here are setting up some things that are going to be happening in that game. So even though some of these events that are brand new to us, we've never experienced before, that don't seem to be that relevant in the grand scheme, they might actually be relevant. And it might be one of the reasons why Nintendo wanted to do a prequel in the first place to this and contacted the Muso team for the first place, because they wanted to set some stuff up for the next game so it's not as not potentially as jarring as it may be otherwise. As an example, let's say that for some reason there's some weird time travel trick in the next one. It won't be as jarring because we've already seen that it exists in the world of Breath of the Wild. Time travel is a thing. I don't know exactly how it happens, but it is a thing. It looks like it's based on some sort of ancient tech device, but either way, it is a thing that exists. So anyways, end of spoilers right there. So yeah, these reviews in general are I think about what I expected. There are some people that thought this game would score in the 80s, mid 80s. I think maybe they thought that just because it's related enough to Breath of the Wild that it would boost it. And it seems that everyone enjoys the Breath of the Wild aspects of it based on the reviews I've checked out. They're enjoying the aesthetic, they're enjoying the story, they're enjoying the characters and the world and a lot. But, in the end, it's still a Musou game, and people generally complain that they get bored with the combat. They get bored with the enemy variety. They get bored with the same things that people get bored with in Musou games in general. Now, if you happen to love, hack and slash Musou games, cool. These things won't bother you because that's just what hack and slash Musou games are. But, it is something to note that most people playing this game are coming into it with a perspective of playing the absolutely, utterly fantastic Breath of the Wild. And when you come in with that perspective, yeah, this game's not going to feel as good. So I think they're kind of drawing, maybe an unfair comparison at times to the prior game, which this one is not trying to be. That being said, they did note that you will enjoy this game more if you had played Breath of the Wild. So people are always wondering, because this is like a prequel, would it be more appropriate to play this game first and then play Breath of the Wild later? And they're saying that most reviews agree that it's better to play Breath of the Wild first, then play this one, because then the characters will have more meaning to you. Now, I think there's a counter to that, however. So some of these characters that let's say you meet them for the first time in this game, say you play this before Breath of the Wild, it can actually lead to you caring more about those characters in Breath of the Wild, right? Like, as an example, we know, that Riju's in the game, right? Like, that's not, but not that big of a spoiler, Riju's in the game. Well, here's the thing, I didn't care about that character that much in Breath of the Wild. I really didn't. I just didn't really care. I felt like the character was mostly irrelevant. Yeah, leader of the Gerudo at the time, that's cool, but, like, I don't know, like, the relevance of the story, Excited, at least, to me, did something. Obviously, there was the full voice acting. There was the interactions that are unforgettable. Even in the DLC, which focuses more on the champions, like there's still get to see young Sidon with Mifa, which is really cool to see. So like there's these cool moments that make Sidon really memorable for me. But like with Riju, I know vaguely who she is and what happened. I just end up not caring about it. But potentially, if I played Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity first, you end up being introduced to this character first in that game. The counterpoint is maybe you end up caring more about those characters when you witness them in Breath of the Wild. So I think a lot of this, people saying that, oh, it's better to play Breath of the Wild first and then play this game, you'll care more. Well, everyone that's reviewing this game has played Breath of the Wild. I don't think there's a single person reviewing this game that hasn't played Breath of the Wild. So it's hard to talk about what's better to play first when everyone's coming from the perspective of having played one game before the other. I think if you're just picking up a Switch and you haven't played it yet, I think you might be able to play this game before Breath of the Wild, and actually helps you like Breath of the Wild even more. So that's just something to consider. Something to hold on to. I mean, yeah, there'll be some things that aren't as surprising, of course. Like King Rome, he's in this game, and one thing at the very beginning of Breath of the Wild will be ruined for you. But so who cares? Like at the end of the day, I think that these games can be played in either order, and you're going to find some enjoyment out of it. Now, I'll maybe even discuss that when I play this game, as, maybe Age of Calamity makes me care about characters I previously didn't really care that much about in Breath of the Wild. So maybe this ends up working for me. So we'll see when my review comes out. But yeah, the reviews are out there. Tread lightly. Some reviews are covering story, some are. If you want a good review that doesn't talk anything about the story at all, I guess suggest checking out Nintendo Life's review, because they do not touch on story pretty much at all. They kind of leave that out, and they do that in a lot of their reviews. So that's something to check out if you just want to know about the gameplay and the world a little bit, some of the characters, but not the story. I personally, one of the reasons I want to play this game is because of the story. So having reviews that have story, even if it's spoilerific in it, is nice, because hey, I'm picking up the game anyways, but I kind of want to know, does this live up to the hype? And it seems like for most of the game, it lives up to the hype. It's the conclusion that doesn't, but then there's more. So you go from there. There's going to be DLC, by the way. There's always DLC for Musou games. There's probably going to be story in that DLC as well. So I think the story of this game might not actually be done at the end of this, because that's the way it was with prior Musou games as well. I don't think the story's done. I think they're going to complete it through DLC, which does beg the differ. Is it a $60 game, or is this end up being a $100 game, and is it worth it? You'll find out when you play it yourselves, or, when I give you my review on it, because I'm a huge Zelda fan, despite my flub on the so-called champion descendants, or not necessarily direct descendants, so, I would say Poseidon's a brother or whatever, but, just in terms of, their importance to the people and being a leader for their clans, I think that we're going to reach a point here where my Zelda knowledge combined with my experience is going to provide you a really useful review if you're not that worried about spoilers. So, warning you now, when my review comes out, which will probably be next week, be ready. I'm also going to be live streaming this game as well this Friday at some point. I'm not sure if it'll be during the day. Not sure if it's going to be at night. Maybe if it's available to play at midnight, I'll do a midnight launch. I have no idea. I'll figure it out. Anyways, I am Nathaniel RoboJams from Untitled Prime. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next video.